So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of Environmental Social Justice. Today, I have Mr. Kyle Burnett. He is the executive producer of the podcast How to Disaster, which is part of the group After the Fire, which was rebranded from the name Rebuild North Bay, an organization that started to help people recover after wildfire disasters. So, Kyle, you are a communications expert, you're a journalist. Is it as bad as we think it is?
Yeah, I mean, let's get into this, Wendy. Thank you first of all for hosting me here today. I don't think it is. Environmental issues are something that we're still trying to figure out in our mind, in our imagination, how big and how complicated and how impactful they actually are. And these situations we're just beginning to understand, and so it's a huge area to think about, and it's scary. But I think there is some of this doom and gloom that really haunts our media side. And coming from my side, where I've been in part of this policy side, journalist and production all my life, basically you get inundated with bad news. But
Yeah.
I've come back to working with GIS, and that's Geographic Information Systems. We'll be talking about this a little bit, but it's about data and looking at data that we actually get from the scientific community. There are some moments that say these things are potentially bad for our world, but also we don't actually know the future of how we can adapt to it, how we can build around it. We can even change some of our economic system to support the climate and support the ecosystem. So I really believe in our adaptability, and that it might seem bad, but we're working really hard. There's so many good people working in this whole sector that's wide reaching across the world
And we
to
are
make a
working
difference.
just so people understand, Geographic Information Systems. Think satellite imagery. So we take pictures from space. We can see how the Earth looks and what things are changing,
Yeah.
weather patterns, jet streams, things like that. So this helps us learn what's getting damaged, what's thriving, what's not working, and remote sensing, very similar technology.
Absolutely.
As well. So you're actively working with those technologies to learn how to make things better.
Exactly. I mean, like primarily, as you mentioned, I'm the host of this podcast, but I got into this program to work with my current group After the Fire to do disaster recovery, because I've been part of a research unit in the Sonoma County, California area, looking at wildfire specifically. So going through scientific studies, looking at data sets, and then imparting that data set onto a computer program, which is what I said is GIS, but there's a whole gamut of programs you can use to use this data, put it onto the program, and then you can see it on the map. So you can actually look at where fire perimeters are, where vegetation types are. And yeah, so through the course of my postgraduate life and into becoming a young professional now, I've been using data to see how the scientific community, they do extensive research that I'm not capable of particularly accomplishing on the field, but because of their rigorous peer review and also the accessibility of their data, they allow other people to use this and distill it for policy, for people in our community, so that we can actually understand what's going on with our ecosystem. And it's an incredible world to get into, because once you crack into it, the whole scope of the world's data sets become part of your thought process. How can I visualize here? Think Google Maps on a more scientific,
That's a
structure,
good
right?
So people can understand what this looks like. But you can also take that GIS, or Geographic Information System data, and look historically.
That's
and
correct.
compare Past,
Yeah.
present, and then hopefully fix the future.
And that's one of the greatest things for me, is that as we've seen some of these stories come out, the environmental problem and the environmental crisis, I mean, everyone gets this nervousness, this anxiety from our 21st century of what's going to happen next. But we don't really know that much about the past. We have lots of indications, but it's hard to get that direct data that we have access to now. And even today, we have gaps in data especially in the deep ocean, out in the wildlands. It's hard to get access to some of this data. So we're working to a better, more connected progress of this data. It's really fascinating because once we kind of get the clearer picture, we can really move forward with even more force than we're doing today. So,
I love the fact you brought up deep ocean.
Yes.
Because, my background being geology, geochem, my geochem professor, who I worked with my master's thesis on, is an oceanographer. And he would spend 4 months out of the year in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on a tiny little boat, basically dumping buckets over the edge and collecting sediments just to see what kind of rocks were down there, what kind of sediments, so they could collect the chemical data. Not just identify what kind of rock, but the chemistry of it, because the chemistry can tell you a lot, how it was, what conditions it was deposited under, maybe even temperature, CO2. I mean, ice cores will tell us CO2.
Yeah.
So there's a ton of data, and we're just now getting inundated.
Yeah, and think about that was just 30, 40 years ago. That was the type of technology we were running with back in the 70s and 60s for most countries. Now, most countries are getting into the process of using either their universities or other high-level institutions to have computer data that's being surveyed by professionals, or in the deep sea. I heard this crazy story where there's this submersible group that it eludes me right now. It's like a Nova. I have to look it up. Maybe I'll send it to you later. But they're sending submersibles down to scan the seafloor to make a more complete seafloor map, because currently, like, satellites can get through some of the seafloor, some of the not the seafloor, the ocean, the water itself. But we can't get below 200 meters or so. The signal becomes so distorted. Think about Wi-Fi through your house. This is on an even grander scope of interference. But they're sending submersibles down to map the floor better. The submersibles come up, transmit that to satellites, and then they go back down. They recharge solarly. It's a monitoring system that's quite novel. And
that's very cool. I knew they were doing deep ocean called bathymetry.
Bathymetry, yeah.
Yes. And the way I tell people to understand what's
shocking.
Think of a bathtub. It's underwater. So bathymetry, bathtub is just the mind games I play so I remember things.
Exactly.
But yeah, we know very little about deep ocean, and a lot. All of our climate. Everything starts with the greenhouse gases and the excessive heat. Everything's warming, and then that changes our oceans. They get ocean acidification. You get warmer water. Then the currents change. Then the jet stream. Everything's connected.
There's so much connected, yeah.
And that's what people don't get. We're all connected. So data and what you're doing and communications. I'm going to just actually jump forward to communication.
Yeah, we can pivot. Let's do it.
You are, you're a journalist. You're a communications expert.
Mm-hmm.
You are spreading this message. You are actively working in this. So tell us about things that you're doing in addition to After the Fire, in addition to How to Disaster, the podcast, just getting that messaging out there.
Yeah, well, first of all, I try to really level my mindset, because I think we really get impacted by this. I mean, with pandemic stuff, which is still currently going on as we're recording, and it could be going on for longer, as well as climate problems. I mean, we're having this situation in our society today where there's so much information being thrown at people. I'm trying personally to take a breath, and there might be some terrible stories out there. And in fact, we are doing damage to our planet. So we have to think about how to live better. I mean, when I'm messaging in public or talking to people, I'm trying to have a more calm sense about this, because if we're making decisions when we're really in that moment of insanity, it's going to come to a bad conclusion. So other than After the Fire, I'm also working, like I mentioned, with a group that does vegetation management and forestry. So wildfire is a really big issue here in Sonoma County. For those of you that are watching, this is an area that has rolling hills, very steep mountain cliffs, also near the coast. It's kind of wine country. The landscape's it's varied, I should say. Yeah. There's a lot of different things happening here. Yeah. When a fire does ignite, whether by some sort of human caused thing, which is the more common thing, or like last year there was lightning
strikes.
The wind from the north blows into this county, coming from Oregon down over the other Sierra Mountains into this area. it generates really incredible wildfire. So we've had some really destructive fires here. That's why I got recruited to join this area, because I've had some experience working with native tribes to do cultural burning and prescribed burning, and also having some data background, kind of a weird mix of tools. But this group hired me, called Taking Action for Living Systems, and I do some part-time work for them also, related to...
You're kind of like the data unicorn. You've got a really
background. It's really funny because, I know I'm talking a lot, but yeah, in my past, I did journalism in my past, and I worked in television. However, I didn't really feel the calling of this is my right place, because I was strictly doing control room work,
got it,
broadcast work, and I didn't feel connected to the natural world, which is where I find a lot of my solace, and I gain energy from being in nature. I find that I'm more peaceful. I find beauty in it. There's so many things that I personally enjoy just about being outside. I play music. I gain inspiration from listening to the wind and stuff like this, even though it sounds ridiculous. But
no, I do that too. The forest after a rainstorm.
Yeah.
But just sitting in the woods, because I grew up in Michigan. I did a lot of camping as a kid. Not with my parents. They did not care for the camping thing. This was school stuff. And then I became a geologist, where I pretty much slept in the woods every single weekend looking at rocks.
Yeah.
So, there's a calling.
So you know what I mean? There's this calling we have, and I think as we're dealing with a lot of our natural work world today, where we're sitting at computers, kind of like this, vis-a-vis. But yeah, we have this need to express ourselves in a more open environment, and so... kind of a weird jack of all trades life. I've gone through different avenues, and I've found my way to the environmental sector. I feel more at peace now that I am actually working with organizations that have this thinking in their business model as part of their message. Yeah. And go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I worked in New York and Boston and downtown LA. You get in that cube farm, and you kind of yourself off from being outside. And I was the type of person that would get into the office at 7 and leave at 6:30 at night, so I never saw the sun. Bad mistake.
New York, yeah, no kidding.
But yeah, you need to get away. You need to get out. And I think when with the shutdown, the beneficial thing was people got out of the office and they were able to be home, and they were able to take time and go for a walk. We couldn't go to restaurants. We couldn't go out and do things. So people actually took walks. They went, I knew people that would say, yeah, I walked about 10 miles today because I felt like it. I had nothing to do. Okay.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Just, we have opportunity to get out into nature. And for me, even though now I'm still working with technology and I'm part of this box, I really do get out and I do study our landscape out here. And even though I haven't lived here too long, this is a beautiful area. I really appreciate the natural world. And so when I am able to give back my own energy some way, this makes me feel better. And I feel like in the long run, I'm aiding to our scientific community, to positive messaging about the environment, and not using scare tactics and not using overblown messaging to get people to feel like their arm is being bent behind their back to do something when it comes to environmental concerns. That's not how we should be handling it. We should be slowly integrating this into the way we live so that our society produces less waste, so that we reuse what we do create, and that we don't use all of our other resources on our planet. So 400 years, 300 years down the line, our ancestor or our progeny way down the line are having major struggles and have to re-answer this question. We have the power today.
We do.
We have so many smart people and incredible influences that I've met, and I am just a small part of this world, but still, we have incredible power as a species to make changes.
You've said so much in the past 2 minutes. There's a lot to process. So first of all, the whole reason for this webcast was no shaming, no blaming, every little bit helps.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you just said. Don't yell at each other. Don't shame each other. Let's try to fix it. And every little bit, even if it's a little change in your own lifestyle, will have a massive effect later on.
Yeah.
And then when people talk about, oh, well, they don't care for solar or wind or hydrogen. I'm like, my response now, because it used to be a trigger for me to pick a fight. And now I just say, do you love exhaust fumes? Could you explain to me what you love about exhaust fumes? Because I'd love to know about that. So again, it's like the whole messaging in a positive
Yeah.
format, positive externalities, not negative ones. So that's
It's a
huge.
good point. It's a good point to make. And currently we're kind of in this area where we're seeing some of our negative externalities of the past. For example, plastic use, right?
Okay.
Plastic was hailed and actually is one of the most influential things we've ever invented.
Yep.
And it's absolutely wild how much we use on a daily basis. But
Everything.
the wonder material is actually causing problems in our ecosystems later because it sticks around forever and it's nigh indestructible to natural processes, so it's
Well, it was cheap and easy.
it's cheap and easy, and
That's why we did it.
and I mean everything. Even you see it in my background. I mean, I'm living in trying to live an environmental life, but I have a plastic pen right here, But we have to try to think like, is this our real best pen that we can create? You know what I mean? Like we can actually do this better if we think through it.
Well, not only that, and I've got a little wind going on here. I have the windows open because it's such a beautiful day. But funny you should say the pen thing, because all of our pens now are plastic. Everything's plastic, plastic, plastic. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the way our grandparents did things.
Exactly.
A refillable pen, fountain pen. Fountain pens were awesome. A little messy.
I have one in my other room.
They're awesome. I mean, they just write beautifully. And, just the little things like people are talking about, when plastic Bic razors, you just buy them, they're cheap, they're disposable. Well, let's go back to snapping on that safety razor back to, what my parents would use.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of people think we need to think forward, forward, forward. Great. But maybe we could take a few ideas from the past.
You're absolutely right. And a lot of this other stuff we reuse by necessity, And that's the type of thing that I'm trying to hold on to, is that I'm trying to reduce my amount that I'm purchasing that I could be reusing if I have the option to. A good analogy or anecdote, if you will, is that I have a really old vehicle right now. I have a 1997 car, and it's the only car I've ever owned. Definitely has problems. It has decent emissions, thank goodness. Otherwise, I'd get rid of it. But it's me buying another car is contributing to all of that extra purchasing. I could buy a used one and keep the whole cycle going. But yeah, it's like I'm trying to resist purchasing something that will be a huge life choice for me. If I can keep this old car alive for 30 years, nearly 20 years.
I'm glad you mentioned the
consumer, what I mean?
Because for the past 20 years or so, well, even longer than that, I would say probably for the past 30 years, all we talked about was buying more, having more, comparing ourselves to others, who has what. And I was guilty of it.
We've all been guilty of it. Trust me.
Have the newest thing. Now I honestly have stopped caring. I have nothing to prove to anybody. And it's like, so I'm just the shopping was hard for me. God, did I love shopping. I had to cut that off because I was buying stuff that I was simply throwing away. There's no point. Donating it isn't really solving the problem, because donation centers were just shipping it overseas and dumping it because it was too much.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't realize that.
There's a lot of stuff that people donate also that is not necessarily, you shouldn't really be donated. Sometimes in disasters, people send expired food or otherwise unusable stuff, and a lot of that stuff does go to the landfill or is disposed of. They have to follow their guidelines of certain donation practices, and donation centers that are doing goods rather than like furniture or Goodwill, right? That aren't selling food, like just random household goods. That's a little different, but it's. Yeah.
I think you can learn a lot from working at a food donation shelter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've done that.
Me too.
And one of the things that blew my mind was they couldn't accept formula. That was a no-no. And they couldn't accept any canned goods that had a dent in it.
That's right.
And
Yep.
a lot of people think that, oh, I'm just going to clear out my pantry. Oh, this is dented. This is older. I'm just going to donate it, do the right thing. And it's like,
Yeah.
you can't. They can't use it, and it gets thrown away. There's so much waste.
There's a lot of that. I had many stories of people bringing in boxes of stuff, and like half of it or more was expired or unusable according to their policy.
Yep.
Now, this is another side to get into our own economic, our consumption, where we're purchasing things we're actually not using, right? I know we had talked about this before a little bit about changing our economic model, but you know,
Oh yeah.
I think working with certain aspects of our society to make them a little bit more, you know, robust rather than produce as much as we can,
Make it better.
make it better so that we actually use the thing. There's always this mindset that drives me crazy though, is people stock up in the event of a
Yep.
catastrophe, but they actually never go back to their stocks to use those. They keep those cans or other dried goods. Oh, I'm going to save these for an emergency, but then we never eat them during normal
Oh,
day, so they end up all going bad
yep.
because a disaster doesn't happen when you had maybe planned it, or you purchased it during a hurricane when your power went out for 2 days, but ended up keeping 40 cans or 20 cans around for another 2 years.
You have to
Like we,
force
we have
yourself to eat it.
we have to like get through this. Like, it's not just our emergency fund. Like, this is actually food that people around the world would really enjoy to have, and we're
Absolutely.
just keeping it in storage.
And yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because again, with the excessive consumerism and
Hmm.
overbuying, overproducing, and people say, oh, growing up, children are starving, finish your plate. That's not helping other people.
Yeah,
Perhaps not overeating.
that's a very guilt response.
Oh yeah.
That's a shaming response. Eat your food because other people are starving.
Yeah.
That always bugged me with my mom.
I was fortunate my mom didn't do that to me, but my friend's moms would, and I'd be like, say what now? How is this happening? I mean,
You've,
even as a little kid, I'm
at
like,
a young age, you're already realizing it. That's great.
yeah. It's like, can I send it? Can I wrap up because again, the over serving, portion control and
Yeah,
overconsumption in everything, you know, and it's again that chain reaction when you think about people say we shouldn't eat meat in moderation.
yeah,
And, when people talk about we have too many livestock, reduce the consumption. Don't.
exactly.
Steak used to be like this special occasion thing when I was growing up, and now people are kind of everyday food, and it's there's no need for that. There's no point.
It's really crazy the difference between people that are like eating meat every day. Like I was born in Oklahoma. Like, don't get me wrong,
Oh
I've
yeah, I
lived in
heard.
Texas.
Yeah.
Barbecue capital, and I am not a vegetarian, but I am definitely limiting my meat consumption for the past 4 or 5 years. I used to be red-blooded meat all the time,
Yep.
barbecue all the time,
Probably
and
amazing, but
and
no,
it's really good. Yeah, I mean,
when done right,
it's
absolutely.
crazy actually. Like, when our taste buds go bonkers with some of this stuff. But I'm trying to
Definitely.
bring it down a little bit. But yeah, it's those folks that I know that I still am friends with. If I told them that they should reduce, they would just immediately label me
Oh
as an
yeah.
environmentalist, just write me off. And I'm like, I'm not saying stop, but
Just think a little,
maybe not
different.
maybe not the
Rethink the way you're
focal
doing things.
point.
And also, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the labels, because everybody, I've been
Yeah.
sort of the environmental person for many, many years, and tree
Hmm.
hugger or environmentalist or whatever you want to call me. It's like, okay, um, it's not a bad thing. I'm not, I don't understand. I mean, just to cut it short, I don't understand the labels.
I
It's
don't
a,
understand why it's so pejorative to love a tree. The trees are great. They give us so much.
they give us oxygen and shade. Awesome.
They and if you're not into that, they increase your property value.
They do. They do.
They
No,
smell nice sometimes. They flower.
oh yeah, after
Yeah.
rain, big fan of after the rains.
After
But
the
yeah, so this is
Where we
a
go.
random conversation. This is awesome. This is what I love about doing these things, because I learned a ton. And one of the things I love about you is you actually know the science. You're like a real data scientist guy who also does communication. So we have that kismet going on. But if you could relay one or two pearls of wisdom to people, what would you choose to tell people?
Yeah, relating to environmentalism is like a few things that I'd like to mention on this, because number one, every little bit does count. You know, it's not just a cliche saying. You know, changing a part of your life and holding to it is not supposed to be like something you have a guilt every day about. Like, oh, I'm reducing meat one day a week, and I'm eating meat all the other days, and I feel terrible. It's like just doing one choice in that sense is putting your financial support in a different company, in a different direction, and that makes a difference. You know, we're only going to really make changes if the current economic structure really balances out, because we're putting a lot into fossil fuel generating plants and other things. So if you're thinking about this guilt that you're feeling, try to erase that from your life. That's not really how it's supposed to go. It's supposed to be hold up what you're doing right. You know, if you're going vegetarian but you can't give up eggs, which I've tried to do multiple times, I can't really stop eating breakfast. I love eggs. Like, don't think that it's the worst thing. It's not the end of the world. It's okay. Like,
there are other small changes that you're making.
There are other things you can focus on. You know, one thing like plastic. You know, if you think a little bit about how you use your plastic, and you just separate it into the correct bin, rather than throwing most of it into the trash can, which a lot of us do, throw plastic in the trash can.
And that you can do a quick Google search to figure out what goes where.
I know it's a little bit extra work on our end, but it also does send it to the right place. Then a professional or some other trained person deals with it. So you're helping the system flow in that direction rather than being counter to it. And the other part is that we're living in a time of great change, and I think our world specifically and our way of life will be vastly different in 50 years. When I'm near the end of my life, and I'm 33 right now. When I'm 80 years old, I'm projecting that this world will it'll have many different changes in the way we actually operate our waste systems, how we operate our production systems. Yes. So individual responsibility is really hard to hold on to with climate. You know, we only can do so much.
And that's really, I was just going to say there's no reason to resist it either. Some people I
don't resist it. Yeah.
Tiny little changes, you know.
Very little changes.
Water bottles and just get a Brita.
Yeah.
A little Brita filter thing. Those things are awesome. Tiny little changes will have a huge response.
Absolutely. And the final point I was getting at here is that our policy and our distribution and our production, I'm hoping, I'm keeping it in my head that within like 80 to 100 years, we're really going to be changing these systems at the top down, because there's a lot of good groundwork that has been laid by professionals in the UN, from our scientific community, people that do work that's even higher up than me on the scientific ladder, you know. And I'm just someone who can distill data that scientists perform and bring it to the public. I'm kind of this conduit between the two, but I really respect the institutions and the organizations that are doing a lot of really good work. I mean, they work to get grants, they work to pay their people, they work to bring data to the public. In the last 10 years, we have made so much discovery and so much more understanding, you know, drawing base maps and getting information to put onto our Google Earth and other things to bring it to the public. It's incredible. So I would say place faith in ourselves. Try not to say humans are inherently always flawed. We have our flaws, but
we're working on it.
We're all working on it, you know. So
I'm glad you brought up that they're, you know, these organizations are working on paying people to do these things, because social justice means a proper paycheck.
Yeah.
Especially what we're seeing now, you know, I'm helping out some recent grads try to find a job, and not only do they say you have to have experience, which as a recent grad you really don't, but the salary is well below what it should be. And
Yes.
these are people, especially people who claim to be working in social justice, and you're not paying someone properly, you're not following the rule book of social justice.
Exactly, and this is our biggest. This is the next nut to crack is how we actually get equal compensation for those that deserve it, and also restitution in some form for how we use native and indigenous lands and other places around the world where resources are harvested or power plants are put on low income and exceptionally, what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know.
They have impacts on their life that are more what's the word I'm looking for? It seriously just escaped me.
It's okay.
These people that are more at risk, I guess is what I was trying to get. There is another word I'm looking for. They're at risk communities, right? So we have a lot of power generation and other things, and we use their land, and low income housing is built around that. This is not justice.
Yeah.
This is not justice for humanity. We have to have our systems built so that we can put industry in one area and have respectable housing for people that doesn't it give them cancer, right?
Yeah, full transparency.
Exactly.
That I'm a huge fan of the transparency, especially when people talk, going back to the salary thing, because some of these, one kid in particular that I'm helping out, he's got his master's, he's got his bachelor's, he's super smart, and the jobs that he's looking at are, I'm like, don't go for that because you'll be pigeonholed in this low-paying job. And some states still require you to disclose your previous salary so they can hold you down to that. And I think that everything should be completely transparent,
Mm-hmm.
and housing should be transparent. And any power plant that goes up, any new industry that goes up, you need to disclose what are you making, what's your off gassing going to be,
Mm-hmm.
everything, and no more secrecy. It doesn't work. We've learned. It took us a long time to learn. Secrecy does not work. And
Yeah.
building on your point of at-risk communities, we have to stop it. Simply put.
So, yeah, just full stop, because this is not fair to those that are given the chance of life, and many of us, we realize how precious life is after some crazy climactic event or maybe personal event in your life, but really we're all very lucky to be here, and we have to do what we can to work together. We're all the same cadre, We're all humans here living on this planet. This is our planet,
Yeah, there's no longer that doesn't affect me, so I don't care.
Yeah.
It affects you. Trust me.
That stopped when we were globalizing, and we're working together. We're not having wars of like World War II or back in the War of 100-year war. We're not fighting for territory the same way. We have our boundaries. I mean, there are some territorial conflicts, of course, but
there's some gray areas there, but
there's some other areas there. But generally speaking, we're not all imperialistic and getting out there and conquering people in the same way. Where we're trying to work together, we have to go the full way. We can't just stop halfway.
Exactly. No, these are great points, and I love the fact you're communicating and educating people as well. Keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing. For people out there, watch his podcast, How to Disaster. It's with the After the Fire people. It's all about wildfires and recovering,
exactly.
Rebuilding. The rebuilding is the most important aspect. Don't do wood houses in fire-prone areas. Bad idea.
Yeah, and we actually had Wendy on our show, so this is kind of a little crossover episode. You can catch her there. So this was a joy to be on here, Wendy. Thank you, and an insightful conversation. Also, I'm very happy to get to know you.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome. I love having you guys on because what you guys are doing is so important. And After the Fire, that whole group expanded to 11 states now.
That's right.
Growing.
U.S. West. That's right.
Yeah. So keep going, keep moving. Add in some flood. You're good to go. You'll have the whole country pretty soon.
I hope that we can help people. That's the real thing. Is that it's not about how big our territory is. That we're trying to do this to throw a wider net, because with our current situation, we're having more problems, and unfortunately, that's the case. So if we can help some people out there, please check us out. We're all about getting you through the disaster process.
Take that breath. Yeah. Take that time.
Please.
Here to help you. So check out After the Fire and How to Disaster. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Wendy.
Such a great conversation. So many touchstones.
Likewise.
So much to learn. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.